All right, it's our great pleasure to finish this day with a conversation between Suzanne Treister and Hans Ulrich Obrist. Suzanne Treister is an artist based in London, and let's not forget, in the French Pyrenees, not far from here. Initially recognized in the 80s as a painter, she became a pioneer in digital and new media form in the early 90s, making work about emerging technologies. Treister's work has engaged with eccentric narratives and unconventional bodies of research to examine the existence of hidden forces that are at work in the world, which will be especially topical for us today. She has exhibited internationally in a very wide range. I will mention recently at the Tate Modern, Kunst à la Vienne, the United Nations, and the 14th Shanghai Biennale, to name just a few. And if you haven't looked at it, you have this beautiful book here, Prophetic Dreaming, that will be straight on the spot of this conversation. And she will be in discussion with Hans Ulrich Obrist, who needs no introduction here. Hans Ulrich Obrist, who is senior advisor at LUMA Arles and director of the Serpentine Galleries in London. Since his first show, the Kitchen Show in 1991, he has curated more than 350 exhibitions, including the beautiful Maria Lasning exhibition, Living with Art Stops One Whittling, that you can see here at LUMA. Please, let's make a round of applause for Hans Ulrich Obrist and Suzanne Treister.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to Marta. Thank you to Maya, to Vasilis, to Flora, to Salma, to Franny, and to you all. And of course, foremost, Suzanne Treister. We should give Suzanne Treister another very, very warm welcome. Now, as Marta said, Suzanne's work is really so essential for the topic of this conference here today, because actually from the very beginning already as a painter in the 1980s, you have created alternative worlds, showed us access to different forms of knowledge, very often different cosmologies. And in a way, today we want to talk about many things which are in this extraordinary book. I want to reiterate what Marta said. If you don't have this book, it's a very urgent book. It really includes everything you always wanted to know about Suzanne Treister. It's a book very recently published for the exhibition in Oxford. And there is also an artist book we did at the Serpentine. We're going to talk about that later in the context of a digital commission. I want to thank here Ben Vickers, who of course has worked with you so closely over the years. We thought that we could maybe begin with a rather early work, because it is interesting that already from your teens in the 70s, you have been interested in magic, you've been interested in philosophy, in psychology, in non-Western belief systems, in ideas of the paranormal in relation to the boundaries of science. And then something happened more than 30 years ago, that you started to connect these interests also to technology. And we wanted to kind of talk about these very early works with technologies you did, because in the 80s it was mostly paintings. And then from 89 onwards, it was more and more related to technology. You got your first computer, and you told me before that it was in 93 already that you then started to bring kind of spirituality, magic, technology together through a video game. And that's, of course, very fascinating, because today, in 2025, more than 3 billion people interact and engage with video games in the world, and that's more than a third of the world population. So that what was a niche activity is today bigger than the film and the music industry together. And the average age of people who play video games today is actually about 35. So it is really people from all generations, who play video games. And today it's of course relatively easy, because we can just use the existing game engines, and that's why so many artists, I think today it's something we addressed with the exhibition World Building, the touring show, where I brought together many artists to do video games today, and where we showed, how incredible artists like Rebecca Allen in the US, Suzanne Treister in the UK, have actually worked with video games at the moment when it was not so easy. So maybe we can begin with that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. So I wanted to start with, hold on, my screen. Oh, yes, thank you. So I wanted to start with a work from 1990, which was called Sacred Vision to Video Games Number 2. So basically, around the mid-80s, I had this boyfriend who was like obsessed about video games, but you didn't have home computers. You had to go to arcades, like in Soho in London. And so I used to hang around waiting for him to finish. And then I suddenly realized that there were I started looking at these games and thinking, like, what's going on here? What is this new technology? I'd not seen digital technology like that in my life, except in these arcades, and it was quite advanced in that sense, that it was images and animation and navigable spaces. Most people were doing word processing on a tiny little green and black monitor. Interestingly enough, even though I was really quite perturbed by the violent nature of most of them, and they were mostly like war games and shoot 'em ups. Personally, I was attracted to the game Tetris. And when you look back at the first early versions of Tetris, it was invented in 1985 by a Russian. The introductory screen has a picture of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, which is a religious space, interestingly. So the first moment that I started thinking about working with technology and work about technology was the same. Simultaneously, I was looking at an image made with technology, which was depicting a religious space inside a video game. To be honest, I've only just realized that an hour ago. When we talked about showing this as a first work. To go back to the menu, so I did all these paintings which were supposed to be imaginary video games where things happen differently than in the actual video games. And so I guess thinking about that technology, I was thinking, how is it going to evolve? How is it going to affect our culture, our civilization? Future technologies, was it going to be used for war? Was it going to be used in peaceful applications? How was it going to be used? And I felt at the time I was the only person asking those questions. Everyone else thought I was just turned into some kind of strange nerd, even though the word nerd didn't actually exist at that point. Had people, anyway. So there was even no vocabulary for what I was. And then, so moving quickly along, in 1991, as Hans said, where are we here? I was midway through reading William Gibson's Neuromancer, which was a kind of about a virtual reality world, or rather a world which had virtual reality in it as an everyday thing, and written by a guy who wrote it on a typewriter at the time. And I suddenly thought, I need to go out and buy a computer. I need to use the actual technology itself to make these works. So I went out, I bought this Amiga computer, and I started making these fictional video game stills. So I think we actually can go next on these. I just mentioned that this website I'm using now, it started in 1995. So a lot of it doesn't have the fancy things that you can do now. And I've kind of kept it, like that. I don't use any web-based software or anything. I just do it myself manually. So this is a series about a virtual paradise. And it has like a system message in those early computers, you'd have this system message would pop up, which, because they were usually not, they could never do as much as you needed to do, so there'd always be an issue. And this is what I was foreseeing possibly for this virtual world of the future, various little problems and breakdowns and kind of disruptions of what might be a virtual paradise. Now enter a virtual wilderness. Software failure, please enact repetition of the crime. And then error and finding question. Oops, there's that doc keep coming up. And finally, no message. And then I did like a very long series of, if we go back to the menu again, which would probably maybe, yep. I did many of these works, and I'll just continue to the next relevant project in this bit of the conversation. Hold on. So then, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Yeah. In 92, I moved to Australia. I couldn't take my computer with me and I couldn't afford to buy another one at the time. And so what I decided to do was I started imagining possible software applications of the future. And I made these imaginary floppy disk boxes where at the time you bought software in a box with a disk inside. And you put the disk in, and then it was like an application. So basically these are kind of like imaginary early apps. I did maybe, I don't know, about 50 of them on different subjects. And for example, in the context of this symposium, the relevant one really is this one. So I imagined that through a software application, you could experience sacred visions. So maybe
that's a great introduction, to all of this work, and it is actually really true what Ben Vickers always said, that you kind of somehow invented the app before the hour. Now, we wanted to talk today a lot about your amazing tarot cards, but before that, maybe one more work in this, affiliation of this technological work, because it is still online, and that's The Escapist. We wanted to talk about The Escapist because that's a much more recent work. It's a mobile web app about black hole space-time, which is basically, yes, it's connected to these early apps in a way, and then maybe from there we can go into the tarot cards. Because what is interesting there is that you really define different rules, because rules can be reset, surrounding systems and dynamics can be built and altered, and new worlds can emerge, new realms can emerge.
Yeah, so when I started this Escapist project, it had actually followed, maybe shall I quickly mention the Survivor F, because there was a preceding project which it kind of evolved out of. So, for example, Survivor F was a project which included a lot of works which had supposedly been transmitted by possibly the last survivor of the human race, who was possibly a woman or possibly a machine intelligence. And this entity in the future had transmitted images to us in our present day in a form that we could understand and read. And they were kind of like almost like post-human mystical realities, some of them, and they mostly appear in this series of watercolors. So what happened is after I finished Survivor F, I then started this Serpentine Commission, the Escapist, and the Escapist was a kind of like a parallel character but different. So the Escapist was supposedly a character who had no fixed identity at all, who possibly lived in a black hole, was possibly like some kind of disembodied entity, a non-specific interplanetary identity. And so the beginning of this project was a series of portals. So I made these 8 portals. Now, these portals were possibly describing his existence in this black hole, and they would have like titles like entrance to paranormal post-human boundary zone, relocation to new dimensions of lost consciousness, holographic quantum psychic visionary data transfer, and rare forms of mystical movement in quantum space-time. So they're depicting another dimensional reality, but at the same time these images are available. You can see they're available to download it by all of you or everyone, and you can use them as a desktop image for your laptop or your device or your phone. They come in different sizes, so that they actually offer you an interface between your daily life and the reality beyond your computer, which is not the evil world of stuff that you often might enter. So it's like a protective interface or a kind of mystical interface between these two realities that we live in. So yeah, you're welcome to download those. And the central part, really, of the Escapist project is this 52-page comic strip, which in which he describes his reality. So if I just click through some of them, I don't. Can you read from these? I'll just click. So. And the Escapist kind of has, maybe I've done it so we can click from the net to the next. Did I do that? Yes. He has a kind of, I call him a he for some reason. He has a particular sense of humour.
You say there are kind of rare forms of mystical movements in quantum space-time, and there is a kind of a numerology involved, 137.
137. So now let's go to 137. Hold on a minute. I can't navigate my own website sometimes. It's such a labyrinth. I don't know how to expect anyone else to. So 137, if we go, there's an actual project I did about 137. So 137 actually connects to when I started in 1918, about the same year as I did The Escapist. I also went to CERN for the first time, where I got this residency award thing. In CERN, which is the European Centre for Nuclear Physics, and where I met a lot of theoretical physicists, I was shown this library of the famous CERN physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who died in 1958, and who had been a very great friend of Carl Jung. And it turned out that, Carl Jung did a lot of dream analysis of Pauli's dreams. So I find it very interesting that a psychoanalyst was psychoanalyzing a physicist, and the physicist was exposing their dream life, which is like quite, in a way you'd think as a kind of binary opposite to their scientific life, which is not necessarily true, but we might think that. And that during their very, very long friendship, where Jung tried to help Pauli, who was quite distressed about various things, they unified in their obsession with the number 137. So the number 137 in science is something to do with the number of the fine constant of the universe, and I don't understand that, but it's the number that kind of everything could be reduced to, possibly, in terms of understanding the universe. And also in Jewish gematria, in the Kabbalah, if you take the word Kabbalah and in Hebrew, and you take the number for each letter, if you add all those letters together, you get 137. So it was a number that connects mysticism and science, which obviously was of great interest to me, and obviously to those two as well. So, yeah.
That's great, and that's a perfect transition to the main chapter, what we want to discuss today, because the focus of the symposium being, the relationship also between art and magic, we have to talk about your tarot cards. And it's something you continually return to ever since we know each other, and already much earlier. And the tarot is a kind of a mystic tool for you to examine the past, the contemporary, but of course also, very much sort of planetary conditions. And you've done this twice now in two extraordinary tarot sets, in HEXEN 2.0 in 2009 and 11, and very recently actually in HEXEN 5.0. You did that in Paris during your residency there. So I wanted to ask you to talk first of all a bit about your attraction to tarot, and what makes this format for you pliable to kind of acquire new meanings. And then from there we can maybe dive into these two HEXEN.
Okay. So in terms of the tarot, I had originally, when I started HEXEN 2.0, I had no intention of making a tarot deck. It's strange, you start on in one dimension and then the other one suddenly comes in. But what I had been doing was using the kind of style of alchemical drawing. So if I just quickly go back to this project, for example, Alchemy, which was 2007 to 8, I translated the front covers of different daily newspapers from around the world into alchemical drawings. And the reason, and I had used these alchemical drawings several years before as well, and the reason I was drawn to this alchemical drawing style from like the 16th, 17th century is because at that time science and art and religion were unified, and I've always been more interested in a holistic take on everything. I never want to be like just into magic or just into science or just into whatever it might be, or politics. You know, I like to think holistically. I guess personally, I think that's the only way we're going to evolve in a positive way. We have to take account of everything, because otherwise someone else is going to be doing a bad thing over there while we're looking over here, possibly. So I made this series of these newspaper covers in alchemical, using alchemical style. So when it came to HEXEN 2.0, the precursor to the actual tarot works was these 5 diagrams, which were done in an alchemical style, which described these 5 interconnected histories of the internet, of computing, of science fiction in relation to utopian and dystopian futures, in relation to the counterculture, in relation to ideologies through time, which were had a kind of negative attitude to the advancing civilization or to technology, and also the Macy conferences. So I'm probably going to have to diverge slightly. Why I started this HEXEN project was because I got interested in the idea of cybernetics, cybernetics being feedback loops of control, which were developed as a theory in 1946 to 1953 in these things called the Macy conferences in New York, which brought together hard scientists and soft scientists to develop a unified theory of the human mind in order to control it in the aftermath of the Second World War and fascism. And what I realized in 2009 when I started this project was these cybernetic feedback loops and this idea of cybernetics, which these scientists wanted to go on to control society with, were actually exactly how Web 2.0 operated in the new interactive internet that had been evolving. And so I wanted to make a very political work, showing people how all these histories come together in the 40s, in the aftermath of the Second World War, and lead to a kind of increasing control society, at which point everyone told me I was paranoid and a conspiracy theorist, until Edward Snowden came along. Anyway,
also because Marseille played a role here, because you actually chose the 78 cards from the Tarot de Marseille, no?
Yeah, so I used a basis of, so based on those 5 diagrams, I had this idea to make a tarot deck where I extracted information from those 5 histories into 78 individual cards, so that it would be, each card would be like an education in one area, and each card would relate specifically to the original meaning in each Tarot of Marseille card. So I had a list of all the cards in the Tarot of Marseille and all the quite complex interpretations of each one, and so I connected all the different aspects into the appropriate space and made this deck.
And the deck was actually circulating before, because I saw someone has it here, and you were just actually signing it for someone before, and actually seeing the deck of cards, I thought it might be nice that you tell us a little bit how one is actually supposed to play the HEXEN Tarot, because one chooses kind of spreads, and you also once told me that you can sort of lay out like 5 cards in a cross. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah.
Like kind of very practically, how do we play your cards?
Okay. I was thinking of doing it here with you. Do you want to do it? I mean, if someone gives us a deck.
Yeah, or we can do it at the end all together.
At the end, maybe we'll do it at the end when we know how much time there is.
At the end of the talk, we can do it as a collective endeavor all together. Yeah.
Okay.
Collective tarot.
If there's a spare deck going, yeah. So essentially, this deck is intended to be used collectively with a group of people. It's not supposed to be for your own personal life future. It's supposed to be about, you have to ask a big question about the future of the planet or something like that. As big a question as possible. And then, whoever in this group takes in turns to pick a card. Obviously, not everyone will pick a card, and you put them face down in a cross, one after the other, and the final one is at the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to give you actually, when I was in a Paris Art Explorer residency last year, I'm not sure who it was, but one of the curators I met had their own way of reading, own spread, and this is the one that I really liked, and I've been doing that one ever since. And so what happens is you turn over the cards one at a time. The one on the far left is the one you open first, and that one is the situation that we are aware of consciously. Yeah. So you open it up, and so let's say I don't know. I can't imagine what it would be. But so you look at the content of that card. You no longer have to think about the original interpretation of the Tarot of Marseille or even know what that is, because that interpretation is embedded in the subject matter of the card already. So you're looking at the subject matter of the card. You read what it is, if it's about a person or a history or an idea, and you think about that in terms of what we're aware of now, and maybe how many people are aware of it, or what it means, what it's saying to be aware of that. And then the next one you open is the one on the far right, and that is the situation that you're unconscious of, that maybe you might need to think about, or that you don't even know about, or whatever. And you look at what information is on there, and you interpret it in relation maybe to the one that you compare the two, what you maybe think people might be conscious of, not unconscious of. And then the middle one is the actual situation, and you look at that in relation to those three, and then the discussion starts, right? You have a discussion about the current situation and the kind of things that might be maybe informing it, that some of them you might not have taken into account, possibly. So you start thinking about, in a bigger sense, the world and the possible future. And then the one at the bottom, you open that, and that is going to be an idea for part of the solution. And it's very interesting, because even if something that's seemingly inappropriate comes up, like maybe something negative, which you wouldn't think would be part of the solution, that's where your brain really has to kind of ache and make a lateral jump to go, how could this bad thing be part of the solution? And then you're thinking it in relation to the other subjects. And then finally, when you open the top one, this is like a possible future, or this is like the future, or a possible future, or possibly the final solution. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it. Possibly a really important solution.
And it's interesting because it took 15 years from... I mean, this year has been a year of sequels, because, of course, we've all been waiting for Kojima's, Death Stranding for so many years, and that amazing video game came out this year. And we've all been waiting for HEXEN for so many years, since, for 15 years, actually. And obviously a lot has changed in these last 15 years. There is AI, there is blockchain, there is DAOs, there is... as you said, there is big tech, but there is also the emergency, the climate emergency, and you basically have a very strong focus on environment. And given the fact that that's such a strong focus also in the LUMA program, I thought it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your kind of the way you connect ecology and spirituality, because you kind of talk about spiritual ecology in relation to HEXEN 5. So maybe you can tell us about, what evolved, how it changed over the 15 years, and how you then came to spiritual ecology.
Okay, well, this is the thing. When I was doing a lot more research for this, this is a really serious update on the previous one. And so I started thinking in terms of which cards can be specifically updated, like social media can be specifically updated. And then various cards could be specifically updated, and some of them couldn't, and then other new things were coming in. And what I found, let's say in the period of 15 years ago, that when I found there was a lot of, there was a thing in America called convergence or something, and it was bringing together like nano, techno, bio. It was a kind of corporate convergence of fields coming together, but maybe not for a positive end, maybe more governmental end. What I found this time is that fields had been converging in a really positive way to more towards a holistic understanding and a kind of proactive helping of the planet through bringing fields together. And one of these fields that I discovered was the field of spiritual ecology. It's an actual field which people had been working on and coming together on. And so when I made the card for it, the card explains what it is, and it gives a lot on the sides. You have like precursors to it, so you can see that, let's say, Francis of Assisi was actually the original spiritual ecologist, and then there was other people, writers and thinkers, yeah. So it's one of the fields I discovered, which made me feel like suddenly a new positive feeling about our future. If we can get rid of all these fossil fuel people and all these other things, then there's a lot of people working in these new convergences, who are trying really hard to change the world. And in a way, I can lead up through that to, for example, when I was discovering all these converging fields, I thought to myself, well, what we really need, I started thinking about cybernetics again from the HEXEN 2.0, and how cybernetics had been about these feedback loops of control, but working through technology, they're not necessarily positive for us, for our individual lives or for our freedom. But if you think about, let's say, the Gaia hypothesis, where James Lovelock in 1973 with Lynn Margulis defined our planet as a kind of total self-regulating system, I realized that's actually a cybernetic feedback loop, and that when you apply cybernetics to the whole planet, it's great, because that's when it was working. When it was its own perfect self-regulating ecosystem. And James Lovelock, even at the end of his life, he always thought that it would survive whatever we did to it. It would self-regulate. But he admitted at the end of his life that he realized, no, we tipped it over and it wouldn't self-regulate. So it suddenly struck me that if you brought back the idea of cybernetics into ecology, and you would actually need, in order to get a self-regulating system for the whole planet, you need to actually bring in every single field. You can't just have spiritual ecology, that's 2 fields. You can't just have bioengineering or something. You've got to have every single field working together, because when people try and do positive things like plant new trees, they might be planting them in a way which actually might disrupt something else. So you can't just do these things without understanding the entire system. And that comes out of systems theory as well. So I thought that wouldn't it be great to have this whole new field, and then I actually realized there was someone else had invented it quite recently. It's called Earth System Science. So I made a card for Earth System Science. And then I don't know if I should go on to this next bit, but when I did my most recent project, but one, it's an extension of this, because what I realized was Earth system science still doesn't include everything. It doesn't include mystical knowledges or mystical understandings and all these other things we've been talking about. And so then I invented the mystical Earth system science about a year ago, and made this whole big. Well, should I go on to this, or did you have another question?
It's a nice way to conclude, I think. Yeah, because I wanted, as my last question, to go there actually and ask you about how you then project these ideas of basically your very holistic ideas into new holistic institutions. Because the Earth System Science actually led to an institute, and there is mountain ecosystem assistants who sit on mountains. There is kind of buildings, there is geothermal energy buildings, there are forest ecosystem assistants, there are cloud ecosystem assistants, there's a whole kind of architectural dimension to your work. And actually, today I was thinking almost like in the building here of Frank Gehry, and I want to remember Frank Gehry here, who very sadly passed away. So in memory of Frank Gehry, I thought it would be nice that we end this conversation about architecture, because not only have you invented a kind of an institute for this new idea of yours, the Institute for Mystical Earth System Science, but you've developed all kinds of other institutions which are partially, I think, not built yet. There is a Museum of Dreaming Mountains, there's a Museum of Cosmic Visions, there's a museum of talking about ecology of regenerated landscapes, There's a museum of ethics and interplanetary technology. There's a museum of Emerald Universe. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit about that, I think that would be great to wrap it up.
Okay, so I've got a page here where I got all the museums together from the various projects. The first museum I think came about in Survivor F, where as I said, this identity from this possible machine or female identity from this deep future was sending us back these visions from that time to our time, and this is where these museums started. So I was imagining museums in the future that we couldn't possibly have now. Like, for example, this is a museum of black hole space-time. I'll just scroll through. Where am I? Yeah, Museum of Cosmic Ecstasy. Some of them weren't like architecture. Some of them were more abstract. But Space Forest Museum, I probably made about 50 museums. And so in that sense, they kind of come from this idea of the future, which is not the usual dystopian idea of the future, I suppose. Ultimately, I think I'm probably an idealist. I'm always trying to think through some kind of mystical fantasy that which basically comes from my Jewish Kabbalistic upbringing, that somehow one can get through all this horror to something better somewhere. And so I suppose these museums are a kind of manifestation of those alternative spaces of the future. And I suppose also because museums are places we love to go. They're not part of everyday life in that sense. They're special. They have things from the past. They give people... They set off children's imagination. They change our lives, basically. And so the idea that in the future there would be these really strange, amazing museums which were like mystical and had so many strange functions that we couldn't even imagine yet. I almost felt like it was endless, like an endless journey to find them. I'm still tempted to do them through, even though I finish one project, somehow when I do another project, a museum will come up. So in The Escapist, I did some other museums. And then in my project, Kabbalistic Futurism, I did more museums.
And then the new one, because here it's actually really fascinating, this drawing. That's the Institute of Mystical Earth System Science. And it kind of made me think, because I remember in a conversation when we had a conversation actually with Frank Gehry, with Maya Hoffman, and Maya asked Frank at the time about, inspirations. He of course talked about, Van Gogh and Elle, but he also talked about Hermann Finsterlin, and this whole Gläserne Kette, this architecture group, who did this crystal, Bruno Taut, the crystal buildings, a big inspiration for Gehry. And of course, at the time, this building, seemed unrealizable, but then Gehry kind of, found ways to realize such complex structures. And when I saw the drawing, I was almost thinking like, it made me think also of Gehry's drawings. Can you tell us about this tower, the Institute of Mystical Earth System Science, the most recent one, and then maybe we can open it up for a few questions.
So we'll just look at the pictures of the drawings for it. So in a sense, when just to slightly precede that, in the video here, I got an AI to design buildings, headquarters of this mystical Earth System Science organization all over the world, in about 200 different parts of the world, but simultaneously. Outside of the AI, I wanted to envisage them myself. So I made these drawings in watercolors where I imagined this institute not necessarily in one place, but like abstractly. So I just kind of had a vision of it in my mind. I kept trying to do these drawings to kind of like get it out, and none of them are like totally what I imagined. It was really, really hard. But they were always like somehow mountain. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the mountains. There's somehow a combination of a mountain and architecture and some amazing place where everything gets put right somehow, like where they cure the whole climate crisis, where everything comes together in this most amazing holistic way. So they're totally utopian fantasies, really.
Beautiful. Now we can maybe open it up for 1 or 2 or 3 questions for Suzanne Treister. Do we have questions or comments?
Thank you. I'm Tatiana. I wanted to ask you the difference between the 2.0 and the 5.0 in terms of technology or the upgrade. Are there still the notions in the 2.0 that we have around us today in terms of AI and the mystical institution?
Yeah, so in 2.0, there's an awful lot about technology, and that's why I didn't need to bring it all in again into 5.0. But so in 2.0, for example, there's one about quantum computing and AI already there, but AI wasn't developed as it is now. So I've presented it here with various possible outcomes, and I'd say the main updates are in climate crisis, ecology, and AI, and all those interrelationships are the main updates in the HEXEN 5, as well as all the changes in terms of like different forms of the internet. So, for example, here we have the ARPANET card, which is the very early origin of the internet in 1969 in California, and in HEXEN 5 we have this one, which takes you up to a hypothetical Web 5.0, which is a very different type of internet, it takes you through the whole history of the internet through. I mean, Web 3.0 is like what we're kind of on the cusp of with blockchain and DAOs and crypto and all of that. But that a lot of it is trying to navigate like what are the pluses and minuses, not to be binary, but where might we be going? What are the risks? What are the uses, abuses, all kinds of things? I did another card, which was, one was the history of AI, and the other one, I probably won't be able to find it, was the uses and abuses of AI. I've also brought in different writers. So in HEXEN 2.0, there was certain types of writers, maybe some science fiction, some other writers, technology writers, and this one has been updated with, like, for example, the Chinese science fiction writer Liu Cixin, who wrote the Three-Body Problem trilogy, which I thought was really amazing, and all kinds of this one has all these possible technologies for restoring the planet as well. So before, the other one was about the technologies more to do with the internet. It was more to do with science fiction and the internet, and this one is more focused towards survival, really. Thank you.
Great. We can take one last question.
Hi, thank you. I had a question. When you were talking about 1:37, what came to mind was the aspect ratio. That's the aspect ratio of the Academy, like the standard for films for most of the 20th century. And then that becomes like the 4:3 ratio. And I was wondering if that's something that is important to you, because in your talk, it also came right after you were speaking about not updating your systems, which would have gone then into like a 16:9 ratio.
Right. So, well, I think maybe what we need to do is we need to contact Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Jung and tell them, because they need to rewrite something back into all those books they wrote about it. Well, thank you.
But thanks to Lucy Raven for this great contribution. And yes, I think we've come to a conclusion of this conversation. I think there is a book signing and there is a tarot seance. So I don't know how we practically should do this and where. I don't know.
Last question.
Yeah, there's a question from Martha. Yeah.
Now, you make these beautiful institutions about spiritual earth system science, and they all are very vertical. And I was wondering if this kind of verticality was a statement, or if you thought as well of like making it as a network, as making it as something decentralized, in the same way that like earth system science usually works, and in the way in which spirituality, after all, like deploys itself.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said, I think they're kind of like mountains. Like mountains being these like really inspiring things, like which like we haven't managed to destroy yet, And so not all of them anyway, because near where we are in the Pyrenees, they're digging up from the behind a lot of these mountains for talcum powder and all kinds of things. You only find out that when you live there. Yeah, I think of them as being outside of our usual networks of cities and streets and all of that. Although the ones that the AI builds are not seen like that. They're integrated into the city. But then I told it to do it. Yeah. I'll think about that, because I'm sure there's some other answers I could come up with if I thought a bit longer.
Amazing. So practically, where should we do the tarot seance and the book signing? Should we do the...
Yes, so the book signing will take place just right here where there are the books, and I think we can improvise maybe a tarot session right here. What do
You said
think?
you'd have some tables, so we can just have one end of a table, perhaps.
One end of a table
Where the book signing is?
at the book signing.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes, we can organize it like
it's
that.
both a book signing and a tarot reading.
Yeah,
I think that's
both.
brilliant. So
Thank
thank
you
you all so
so
much, and a
much.
big round of applause for Suzanne Treister. Let's give Suzanne another big round of applause.